So we went over a bunch of demand shifts just to reiterate the difference between a shift and a movement. So remember, if just the price is changing, then that's causing a movement along the demand curve. So if this is our demand curve, we're going along here. If that's our new demand curve, we're going along here. And something other than price that is relevant for this market, then you have an increase or a decrease in demand. You're changing demand. And so there's a difference between quantity demanded changing because of a lower price, and here we have quantity demand changing at each price. So a shift means quantity demanded is changing at each price versus just responding to a price change. So it's important to keep that difference in mind. So up until now, we've been basically talking about a market demand curve because remember, I said that I was surveying 10 people to construct that demand curve. So that 10 people was made up that little market that we had. We could also have an individual person's demand curve. So I could say for this particular good, at $10, I'd be willing to buy three of them. And if the price dropped to four, I'd be willing to buy nine of them. Obviously, this is something that I'd be willing to buy multiple units, and someone else might have a different shape demand curve, and we'll talk about shapes of demand curves a little bit later. But I wanted to pick the same price so that we can make this comparison. So price of 10, this person wants 4, price drops, they want 6, and so the way we're going to get a market, let's suppose these two people make up the entire market, then we want to sum these demand curves in order to get our market demand curve, and all you're going to do is do a horizontal sum of these demand curves. So we just say at a price of 10, well, if we have 3 units over here and 4 units over here, we're just going to add that up to get 7 units for the market as a whole. Since we're doing straight lines, I just get 2 points here, 2 prices, that'll give me a straight line over here. So a price of 4, obviously I'm just going to add these up and I get that. So that's all we did there to get that market demand curve. And so you could imagine that if I had people give me their individual demand curves, and I could have gotten the same result that we had before by just asking people. So I could just ask people at 10, how many people want to buy this good? 7 people, are willing to do it. I drop the price, I get more people. So now again, this is all kind of simplified, models that we're creating here. So you may not actually know what your own demand curve looks like until you're faced with the market price. But the market price really forces you to create at least a portion of your demand curve. So if I face a price of 10, then either I'm willing to buy or not. So either I have some quantity demanded or else I'm not a buyer at that price. So we say that people have revealed preferences. Once you face a price, then you're sort of forced to reveal your preference. Either you're willing to buy or you're not. So even though this is all pretty theoretical, we could actually construct someone's demand curve by looking at market behavior. Okay, so moving to the supply curve. So just like our demand curve is downward sloping, our supply curve, at least in general, is going to be upward sloping. And so now we're looking at it from the supplier's point of view, the producer of this good. We're selling some good. So let's say we're producing cars or something, and so all we're saying here is that other things being equal, the price of that car is higher, and our suppliers are increasing their quantity supply. They're willing to supply more when that price is higher. So here, obviously these numbers are just arbitrary, so P1 is a higher price than P2. And so it seems pretty intuitive that other things being equal, that at a higher price our sellers are willing to sell more. Now we're going to sort of dig into the supply curve in a lot more detail later on to see where this comes from, but for now we're just going to accept that intuitive result that other things being equal, higher price, sellers are willing to sell more. And the same idea with demand, difference between supply and quantity supplied. So just a movement along our supply curve, price changes, that's a change in quantity supplied. If something other than price is affecting this market, then supply is going to be changing or be shifting our supply curve. And just like demand, we're thinking of shifts as right to left. So an increase in supply is going to be a shift to the right. A decrease in supply is going to be a shift to the left. So again, the quantity supplied at each price is lower. So that is a decrease in supply if we are shifting to the left. So just going through the major supply shifters. So one of the major ones is going to be something that affects the cost of production. And a major one is going to be some kind of input price. So our input, let's say we're that car producer again, an input could be the price of steel. Well, price of steel goes up, that's a cost. That's going to make it more or less likely for suppliers to want to supply or increase or decrease supply. So price of steel goes up, cost goes up, that's a supply decrease. right? So other input could be wage cost, which we'll talk about later in a lot more detail, but something affecting cost of production. So other things being equal, remember we're always holding things equal. So if a cost is changing while nothing else is changing, that means that our firms want to supply less at each given final price of that good that they're selling. Well, now it costs more. I want to reduce my quantity supplied at each price given that the cost of production is now higher. So kind of related to that, if there's a technology change, and normally we're looking at a technology improvement, so it's anything that really makes it easier or cheaper to produce is going to increase supply. So that would be a shift to the right. And this kind of carries over from demand, the number of sellers. Now, if we're creating a market supply curve, just like we had a market demand curve, and we just add more sellers, well, at the same price, you have more people selling, so the quantity supplied at each price is going to be higher. And I kind of included this in this category because other things could be affecting the amount produced. So we could have an example where this is the supply of some agricultural good and we have some kind of harvest, either decline or increase, and so, or some kind of natural disaster. So lots of different things could affect the total amount in this market that gets produced. If we just literally destroy supply, so we have a bad harvest, let's say, well, that's just a decrease in supply for the market. So lots of things can cause that market supply to change. So I'm kind of lumping it into the amount of supply or the number of sellers. And similar to what we said about demand, the expected price, the future price of this good. So other things being equal, if sellers expect this good to sell for more later, well, I want to reduce my supply today. And again, we're going to see as we anticipate that is going to affect the current price, because as we decrease supply, we'll see that is going to tend to raise the price. So we're just responding to those future expectations. Now we also have substitutes and complements on the supply side. This is different from the consumption substitutes and complements that we saw. So this is now substitutes in production, and what that means is for a given set of resources, you might change the good that you're producing. So for example, let's say we could use the same manufacturing plant to produce cars and trucks, which could have separate markets and separate prices. And so if we were producing fewer cars, then we might just substitute into producing trucks. And so we might be responding to the price of one versus the other. So let's say this market that I'm looking at here is the market for cars, and something is causing the price of trucks to be higher. And so other things being equal, I want to go produce more trucks and fewer cars. And since this is the car market, I'm responding not to the price of cars, but to the price of some other good, the price of that substitute good. And so in the car market, that would be a shift, because we're responding to the price of something other than the price of this good. So that would be an example of production substitutes. And production complements would be goods that tend to get produced together. So you don't see these as often as the other supply shifters here, but let's say we're drilling for oil, and at the same time you're also going to be producing natural gas. When you do that, you're going to be drilling for gas at the same time. And so if you're responding to one, then basically you're responding to the other. So if the price of gas is going up, which would normally make me produce more gas, well, then in the market for oil, I'm also going to end up producing more oil because they tend to get produced together. And again, if it's anything other than the price of this good, so this is the market for oil, then the price of gas is something other than this price. So that would have to be a shift in this market. You could be responding to a price change in the other market, but it'd be a shift in this market. So for now, those are our major supply shifters. We'll see there might be some others, so we're going to talk about taxes, which would be another shift, but we're not going to look at that right now. So now what we have to do is put the supply and demand together, and we've got ourselves a market. And so let's think about what's going on with the price here. If I had a price for some reason at P1 over here, well, at P1, the quantity supplied is this point. The quantity demanded is this point, so more people are willing to sell at this price compared to the amount of people who want to buy. We call that a surplus, and we're going to look at this more in the next unit when prices are away from equilibrium, because right now what we would expect, if nothing's stopping this price from adjusting, we got a bunch of people who would like to sell at this price and fewer buyers, and so that's going to tend to start moving the price, right? Our sellers are going to be willing to start dropping this price, and we're going to tend to move towards this equilibrium price. So at equilibrium, if nothing else changes, we're just staying there, because at that point quantity supplied equals quantity demanded, and we call that an equilibrium. Or another way of saying is that we call it a market clearing price. The market clears at P2. Anyone who wants to buy at P2 is able to buy. Anyone who wants to sell at P2 is able to sell. and the market is in equilibrium. And similarly, if we had a price down here, well, you have lots of people who want to buy it at this price P3, but there's only this much for sale. So the quantity supplied is down here. That's what we call a shortage. And so if this market can adjust, if nothing is stopping this market from adjusting, our buyers are going to tend to push up this price, right? Because there's not enough to go around for people who want to buy it. Well, they're willing to pay more. It's going to push the price up to that equilibrium price. So normally we'll be starting in equilibrium, and then something is going to shift. So let's say one of our demand factors changes, income goes up, it's a normal good, demand increase, we have a new equilibrium. So this is the way we're going to label our graphs. We just give it a new equilibrium, new price, new quantity. We could have something affecting the supply. So this is a decrease in supply, higher price, lower quantity. And something to keep in mind, that just to avoid confusion, so suppose that there's a cost increase in this good, just keep in mind from the buyer's perspective, that's not affecting your demand. It's not affecting your willingness to pay at each price. You don't go to the store and before you decide your willingness to pay, you're not going to ask about what's going on with the cost of production, right? Not really your problem. You're just responding to the price change. So as far as buyers are concerned, something affected the price of this good, and they're just responding to that price change. This was already my demand for this good. So I already knew that if the price were P2, then I want to buy Q2. If the price was P1, I'd want to buy Q1. So something caused that price to go up, don't really know, probably don't care, but I'm just responding to that price change. The cost change has caused suppliers to change their supply. So they're selling less at each price. That causes this price to go up. Demanders are just responding to that price. So we could have a double shift here. And so we're just going to do a bunch of questions where something shifts, more than one thing shifts, and then we're just looking at where the new equilibrium is. So here I showed the arrows. As long as we're labeling our curves, that might not be necessary, especially if we have a double shift like this. But then we just want to label the new equilibrium. So the new demand curve and new supply curve is now here, so this just becomes our new equilibrium. So you can see that in this case, because the demand shift is a little bigger than the supply shift, the quantity, this causes the quantity to go up, this causes the quantity to go down, but since the demand shift was bigger, the net change is that the quantity goes up here. And so in this particular case, both of these shifts cause the price to go up, so the price definitely has to go up here, and whether the quantity goes up depends on whether that demand shift or supply shift is bigger, because they're going in different directions.